Hello. Emily and I had been married for 6 years. At 35, I thought I had it all: a stable job, a beautiful home, and a wife I adored. Emily, 33, was my best friend and my partner in everything. We'd built our lives together piece by piece, and while things weren't perfect, I believed we were solid. But that was before I noticed the changes. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Emily became glued to her phone, smiling at messages she wouldn't share. She'd claim it was just the girls, but the way her eyes lit up didn't match the excuse. Our late-night talks, once a cornerstone of our marriage, faded into silence. She'd sit on her side of the bed, engrossed in her own world, while I pretended to sleep, wondering who was on the other end of her laughter. "Work's been crazy," she'd say when I asked why she was distracted, brushing off my concerns with a quick kiss. But I knew her too well to buy the excuses. The distance between us grew. Emily stopped confiding in me, dodging my questions about her day with vague answers. When I tried to reconnect, planning date nights, suggesting weekend getaways, she'd claim she was too tired or busy. I wanted to believe it was just a rough patch, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The final straw came during a weekend barbecue with friends. David, one of my closest friends, had always been around. At 37, he was the charming, life-of-the-party type, always quick with a joke or a drink. His wife, Laura, was his opposite, quiet and thoughtful, with a warmth that made everyone feel at ease. That day, I noticed David hovering around Emily. He laughed too hard at her jokes, his gaze lingering on her a second too long. When he handed her a drink, his fingers brushed hers, a gesture so subtle most wouldn't notice. But I did. My stomach twisted. Was I imagining things? Or was there something between them? I tried to push the doubts aside, but they only grew stronger. A few days later, one of my coworkers, Tom, casually mentioned seeing Emily in town with a guy. "Probably just a friend," he said with a shrug, not realizing the storm he'd unleashed in my mind. Who was she with? Why hadn't she mentioned it? The suspicion began to consume me. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to find Emily sitting in bed, laughing softly at something on her phone. She quickly turned off the screen when she noticed me stirring. "Can't sleep?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just a funny meme," she replied, setting her phone face down on the nightstand. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but my mind was racing. The tipping point came during another gathering with friends. David's attentiveness to Emily was impossible to ignore, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. Laura, sitting quietly on the other side of the room, watched her husband with an expression I couldn't quite place, something between sadness and suspicion. When the party ended, I decided to test the waters. I sent Laura a casual text the next day. "Hey, just curious, have you noticed how close David and Emily seem lately?" Her response was almost instant. "Funny you mentioned that. I've been thinking the same thing." My heart sank. Laura's words confirmed what I'd been dreading. Over the next few weeks, Laura and I began piecing together the puzzle. Late nights, flimsy excuses, and overlapping work commitments painted a picture we couldn't ignore. Our text became a lifeline, a way to vent and share our frustration. "David had another meeting last night," she wrote one evening. "Emily had a late-night work call," I replied bitterly. Every message brought us closer to the truth and closer to each other. The breaking point came one Friday night. Laura texted me, saying David had just left for another supposed meeting. Emily, coincidentally, was also working late. "Do you want to find out once and for all?" Laura asked. I didn't hesitate. "Yes." We met in a parking lot near Emily's office, our cars tucked into the shadows. The tension was palpable as we waited, watching for any sign of them. 10 minutes later, Emily emerged, glancing around nervously before climbing into David's car. They drove off together, and Laura and I followed at a safe distance. My stomach churned as we watched them pull up to a hotel. They got out, laughing and touching, completely oblivious to the world around them. Laura's hand flew to her mouth as she stifled a sob. I snapped a few photos, each click of the camera like a dagger to my heart. We sat in the car for a long time after they disappeared inside. Laura broke the silence first. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered, her voice trembling. Neither can I said, my anger bubbling beneath the surface. That night, I lay awake, replaying everything I'd seen. Emily tiptoed in hours later, sliding into bed as if nothing had happened. I didn't confront her, not yet. I needed time to process, to figure out what to do next. The next morning, I tried to act normal, but every word she said felt like a lie. How was work last night? I asked over coffee, forcing a casual tone. Busy, she replied, avoiding my gaze. You know how it is. I nodded, fighting back the urge to call her out. Instead, I texted Laura, we need to talk. The following weekend, Laura and I met at a park, far from prying eyes. Sitting on a bench overlooking a quiet pond, we shared our stories, venting about the lies and betrayal we'd endured. It feels like a nightmare, Laura said, her voice heavy with emotion. How did we end up here? I don't know, I admitted, but I'm not letting them get away with it. She nodded, a spark of determination in her eyes. Neither am I. In that moment, something shifted between us. It wasn't just anger or sadness. It was a connection, born from shared pain and a mutual understanding. After that night at the park with Laura, everything changed. What started as an exchange of mutual frustrations turned into something deeper. We began texting daily, sometimes late into the night, sharing everything from the small details of our lives to the overwhelming emotions we were both trying to manage. At first, it felt innocent. After all, who better to talk to than someone who truly understood the situation? But as the days turned into weeks, our conversations started to stray beyond just our shared betrayal. One evening, Laura sent a text that caught me off guard. You've been handling this a lot better than I have, she wrote. Not sure I'd call this handling it, I replied. I'm just trying to keep it together. Well, you're stronger than you think, she wrote back. Her words lingered in my mind long after the conversation ended. Meanwhile, things at home with Emily were growing unbearable. She acted as though nothing had changed, going about her daily routine with a casual indifference that made my blood boil. Anything exciting at work? I'd ask, watching for cracks in her facade. Just the usual, she'd reply, avoiding eye contact. She thought she was getting away with it. I started spending more time away from home, using work and errands as excuses. Most of that time was spent with Laura. At first, we met in public places, cafes, parks, anywhere we wouldn't be noticed. But soon, we found ourselves seeking more privacy. One evening, Laura invited me to her house while David was working late. I hesitated at first, knowing how dangerous this could be. But curiosity, and something else I couldn't quite name, got the better of me. When I arrived, Laura greeted me with a warm smile. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, but there was an ease about her that I hadn't seen in Emily for years. Thanks for coming, she said, motioning for me to sit on the couch. Of course, I replied, feeling a strange mix of guilt and anticipation. We spent the evening talking, sipping wine as the conversation flowed effortlessly. There was no awkwardness, no forced politeness, just two people finding solace in each other's company. At one point, Laura leaned back, her expression softening. You know, Ethan, I don't think I've ever really thanked you. For what? I asked, genuinely confused. For being here. For listening. I don't think I could get through this without you. Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment, all I could do was stare at her. You don't have to thank me, I said finally. We're in this together. After that night, our connection deepened. We started spending more time together, finding comfort in the bond we'd formed. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about the way Laura made me feel seen and valued, something I hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, Emily and David continued their charade, oblivious to the fact that their secret was no longer a secret. I'd catch glimpses of their shared laughter during gatherings, their stolen glances when they thought no one was watching. Each moment added fuel to the fire burning inside me. But I bided my time, knowing that my silence was the key to taking control. One evening, Laura and I decided to confront our spouses together. We were tired of the lies, the betrayal, and the constant second-guessing. But before we could act, something happened that changed everything. It was a rainy Tuesday night, and Laura had invited me over again. David was out, and Emily had claimed she'd be working late once more. When I arrived, Laura was waiting for me on the porch, her arms crossed against the chill. "Rough day?" I asked, stepping inside. She nodded, her expression weary. "I'm just so tired of all of it." We sat on the couch, the sound of rain tapping against the windows. For a while, we just sat in silence, the weight of everything hanging in the air. "I wish things were different," Laura said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Me too," I admitted. She turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "Do you ever feel like you're just going through the motions?" "All the time," I said, my chest tightening. Laura hesitated, then leaned closer. "You've been the one constant in all of this, Ethan. I don't know what I'd do without you." Her words were like a spark, igniting something I couldn't ignore. Before I could think, I leaned in, and she met me halfway. The kiss was hesitant at first, both of us testing the waters. But as it deepened, all the anger, sadness, and frustration we'd been carrying melted away, replaced by something raw and undeniable. When we finally pulled back, Laura's cheeks were flushed, her breathing uneven. "I don't know if this is right," she said, her voice trembling. "Neither do I admitted. "But it feels real." We didn't cross the line that night, but the connection we shared was impossible to ignore. I left her house feeling more conflicted than ever, torn between the anger I felt toward Emily and the comfort I found in Laura. At home, Emily was already in bed, her phone clutched in her hand. I stared at her for a long time, wondering how we'd gotten to this point. Two people pretending to love each other while secretly living separate lives. Something had to give. The night everything came crashing down, Emily came home late again. She walked through the door, smelling faintly of David's cologne. Her lips curved into a practiced, carefree smile. "Hey," she said, dropping her bag on the counter. "Long day. I'm heading to bed." I watched her, silent and cold, as she walked past me. The lies came so easily to her now, like second nature. But tonight, I was done playing along. The next morning, I sent Laura a text. "It's time. Let's do it tonight." Her response came quickly. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I wrote back. "They don't get to keep pretending." We agreed to meet at my house that evening. The plan was simple. Confront Emily and David together, expose their lies, and force them to face the consequences of what they'd done. That evening, Laura arrived at my house just as Emily was finishing dinner. She looked nervous, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes. "You ready?" she asked as I opened the door. "More than ready," I replied. Emily looked up from the kitchen table, her smile faltering when she saw Laura standing beside me. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find David standing there, his usual cocky grin fading as he took in the scene. "Ethan, hey," he said, glancing nervously at Laura. What's this about? Why don't you come in and find out?" I said, stepping aside. The four of us stood in the living room, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Emily and David exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence wavering as they realized something was wrong. "You two have been lying to us," I said, my voice steady but cold. "And we're done pretending we don't know." Emily's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," Laura snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "We know about the hotel, the texts, the late nights. We know everything." David opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Emily, on the other hand, tried to deflect. "This is ridiculous," she said, forcing a laugh. "You're making something out of nothing." I held up the photos I'd taken of her and David at the hotel, their laughter frozen in time. Emily's eyes widened, her bravado crumbling in an instant. "You've been spying on me?" she said, her voice rising in indignation. "Don't," I said, cutting her off. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. You're the one who broke our vows, Emily. You're the one who chose him over me." David tried to step in, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Look, man, I'm sorry. It just happened." "Save it," I snapped. "You're not sorry. You're just sorry you got caught." Laura turned to him, her voice trembling with rage. "How could you do this to me? To us? I gave you everything, and you threw it away for her?" David looked down, unable to meet her gaze. The confrontation ended with Emily storming out, tears streaming down her face, and David trailing behind her like a scolded dog. The house was silent once they were gone, the weight of what had just happened settling over Laura and me. We sat on the couch, exhausted and emotionally drained. For a while, neither of us said anything, the silence speaking louder than words ever could. Finally, Laura broke the silence. "What now?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Now, we pick up the pieces." But the night wasn't over yet. Laura stayed for another glass of wine, both of us too shaken to be alone. The conversation started light, awkward attempts to distract ourselves from the pain. But as the hours passed, the atmosphere shifted. "You know," Laura said, her voice soft, "I don't think I've ever felt this connected to someone before." Her words caught me off guard, but I couldn't deny that I felt the same. "Me neither," I admitted. She leaned closer, her eyes searching mine. "Ethan, I don't want to regret this." "Neither do I," said, closing the distance between us. What happened next was inevitable. The anger, the betrayal, the hurt. It all melted away in that moment, replaced by something raw and real. Laura was everything Emily wasn't: attentive, passionate, and honest. For the first time in months, I felt alive. The next morning, reality hit hard. Laura and I parted ways, both unsure of what our connection meant in the long run. What we shared was cathartic, but it didn't erase the mess our spouses had created. The divorce proceedings with Emily were brutal. She fought tooth and nail for the house, the car, and even the savings we'd built together. The evidence I had of her affair helped, but it didn't make the process any less painful. As for Laura and David, their marriage didn't survive either. David moved out, leaving Laura to rebuild her life on her own terms. Months later, I found myself in a small apartment, far from the life I'd once shared with Emily. Starting over wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As for Laura, we stayed in touch, though things between us never fully materialized. What we had was a moment, born out of shared pain and mutual understanding. It wasn't meant to last, but it gave me the closure I needed to move forward. Emily and David? I heard through mutual friends that they didn't last either. Whatever spark they'd shared fizzled out once the consequences caught up with them. Life after betrayal isn't easy, but it's mine. And for now, that's enough. Goodbye.